welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo, and today we are going to be doing my April wrap-up. So in this video, I'm going to talk about all the books I read, the things I wrote, and some personal life tidbits that I feel like sharing with you guys. So we have a lot to talk about because despite what you might see in my vlogs, my April was intensely busy, and I read a lot, and I did some things with writing, and I did a lot of personal things, so let's jump into it. So first I want to talk about the 7 books that I read in April. Yes, I read 7 books. I also started a couple other books, and I also decided to DNF a book. So let's talk about them. But the first book was The Dark Between the Stars, a poetry collection by Atticus. And I didn't like this. I'm not going to waste a lot of time on this. It was a very quick collection. I really wanted to get something out of a male perspective in poetry, and this was just not it. I felt like most of the poems were just literal sentences, like something that sounded pretty, but it sounded like half a thought. Like it didn't go anywhere. So if we were talking about like, oh, the stars looked so beautiful tonight and so did you, then that was the poem. That was it. There was nothing after that. It didn't add to it. Like there was no rhyme or reason. My friend put it the best way. They sounded like really pretty sentences in a bigger novel, but because they were by themselves as literal sentences broken up into a poem form, it just didn't land with me, and that's it. I just didn't have a great time with this. So we move on. Then I read Under This Red Rock by Mindy McGinnis. Mindy McGinnis is one of my favorite authors, and I did enjoy this book, but not as much as I have with some of her other novels. I gave it about a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I rounded it up to a 4 because I feel like she's still great at creating atmosphere. Mindy McGinnis is like perfect at suspense and mystery and building the tension in a novel, and she nails it with this book too. It was very atmospheric. You're in a cave, there is a murder mystery going on, and because the main character suffers with mental health, there is a question of like, did she misremember something? Like, is something actually not as it is? Can we trust our narrator? And that was a really fun aspect for a young adult novel. The main thing I had issue with was just the ending. I felt like after building up all this tension, the ending was so rushed and a little less realistic than the rest of the novel. And granted, I do suspend my disbelief because some of these situations may not be as possible, but like growing up in a small, like rural area like Mindy McGinnis does in Ohio, like all of her books are set in Ohio, and Pennsylvania isn't that different in some ways. Like I can see stuff like this happening for sure, but the ending was a little too unrealistic. Like things wrapped up a little too easily, in my opinion, after we like were building up this tension for so long. So that was my only issue, really. Then I read Heirs of Bone and Sea by Kay Adams, and this was another book that I just kind of felt in the middle of the road. Started just skimming through it, to be honest, towards the end of the book, and I already don't remember much of what happened, unfortunately. It was fine. It was a fun debut. I see the author's potential in a lot of ways, but I was kind of promised pirates, sapphic romance, and necromancy, and none of them felt strong, unfortunately. The pirate aspect didn't really feel much like pirates. The sapphic romance was very forced, in my opinion. This is a YA fantasy, and I do tend to have an issue with a lot of YA fantasies that the romance just always feels like way too fast and rushed. So that, like, it also just didn't feel like they had much chemistry either. So I think that also added to the feeling of it was forced. And the necromancy was barely there, even though we had this promise of death magic. So I will read something else, I think, from the author, but I don't think I will be continuing with the series. Then I read The Return of Ellie Black by Miko Jean, and I loved this one. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It's a mystery thriller. In this novel, you have a detective who is an adoptive Asian woman, and she was adopted into a white family, and her sister was killed when they were teenagers. And since then, like, the family kind of fell apart, and this detective decided to like kind of follow in her father's footsteps and become a detective and almost make up for the fact that she couldn't help her sister when they were younger. So there's 2 parts of this where like you're following her story and her getting to process her sister's death, as well as this other story where Ellie Black, who was the first real big case of this detective, went missing 2 years prior to the start of the novel, and suddenly she turns back up and won't speak and won't talk about what happened, where she was, or like who was involved. So there is a really great mystery element to it. There's a lot of like good little dynamics of like tension and how grief can like really alter family dynamics and also burden like the relationships you have. And I just really loved it. It was just a fun time. I flew through it. Like, it might not be the best mystery thriller out there, but this is the author's debut. And for a debut, I found it very compelling. So I am thinking that I will definitely read something more from her if she continues in this genre. Then I read The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard, and this is like a dystopian world, kind of like Never Let Me Go, and it is compared to that, and I do think it's on brand with that. So if you like Never Let Me Go, I think you would like this book, where basically there are these 3 valleys, and each valley is 20 years apart. So the one valley is 20 years to the future, then we have the present, then we have 20 years in the past. And while a lot is not explained of like how the inner workings, like why, it's one of those worlds where like you just have to accept it that this is the reality and dive into the book. I really liked the dynamics and how the main character, who is Odile, she's 16 when we are watching her for half of the story. She kind of sees something that she's not supposed to see, and that reflects like all of her decisions and like who she is as a person throughout the rest of her life, and how that influences like what's happened, as well as this really interesting thing, like there is a kind of concept of like, can we change or affect time, especially if we know something's going to happen, but it's done in like just a fascinating way. Like, instead of like time travel, like you have these valleys that represent like time travel. So I don't know, it was a really cool novel. I felt like detached from the main character, but in a good way. Like, that is her kind of personality. So like, while I wasn't saying like I was rooting for her or like sympathizing with her at times, like I did feel like this was interesting to watch her and see like what decision she was going to make. Sometimes almost like watching like a science experiment. Like, that's almost how it felt like, but in a really like fun way. So I don't know if that sells you or not on this book, but I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, and I believe this is a debut, so again, I might look for something else by this author when they come out with it. And the last thing that I want to touch upon is a book that I'm not going to talk too much about. I will leave my dedicated review up below. It's unlisted on YouTube because I didn't want it to muck up my whole algorithm of my upload schedule and whatnot, but I do have it up there. I'll link it below, you guys, if you want a little more thoughts on it. It's called Fragments by David Moyer, and it's a poetry collection that it's just very unique. It's told in literal fragments, both the way that the poems are shaped, like they're run-on sentences and they cut off and they're paragraphs of like just like your thoughts spewing, but also fragments of like thoughts where like you'll have like these bulky paragraphs, and then you'll have a few thoughts that are connected to something else, and then you'll have another bulky paragraph, and then you'll have thoughts that are like continuing the thought from the shorter paragraph. So it's very interesting to read. I personally had kind of a hard time with it, and for that reason, like, I would give it a 3. Like, I respect what it was trying to do. I didn't always jive with it, and sometimes it messed with my brain. But yeah, if you're interested in learning more about that, then I will direct you to my dedicated review. And with that said, that's all the books I read. So, I mean, we did pretty well. The only thing I'm going to mention on top of that is, if you were invested in my channel at all, or just kind of missed it because I was uploading a video a day for Vlogmas, and I don't think it did really well at all. So if you're interested in going back to see that, that's cool. That would be great. I did a dedicated reading vlog of the books that I had asked you guys to pick for me in my TBR for the coming year. So I did that, and I read all the books last year that you guys picked, and one of them was Glasstown by Stephen Seville. And I said at the end of the vlog that I didn't finish it because I was just struggling and I was running out of time, and that I would like to get back to it. And I'm halfway through and I have not picked it up, and I decided to officially DNF it. The story legit, like, I'm on chapter 24, and it just did not pick up in a way that was satisfying for me enough to really even consider going back to this when there are so many more books out there that I want to read. So I do think I'm either going to sell this or maybe like donate it to my blind date with the book thing I got going on with my book club. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with it, but we're not getting back to this book, and that's official. I'm just over it. So now let's get into all the things I wrote. So first and foremost, I have to say, I have a poem out in the world. I have 2 poems out in the world. I officially debuted with my pen name for the Dear Survivor Reclaim the Light poetry anthology, and this was really, really tough for me to submit to. There was a lot of self-gaslighting going into this of me like thinking if I should submit poems, like then how would I feel if people read the poems? This was a whirlwind to even submit. So the fact that I have my name in a poem and everything in this book, my pen name is B. Lopka, and there are 2 poems in here, and that's just wild to me. Like I can't believe it, you know? Like they're out there, and I'm sharing a big part of myself with the world. So if you haven't got this copy, it would mean the world to me if you do, because it doesn't just support me, it supports all of these amazing survivors. It also supports a small indie press. So yeah, that's really cool. And that's really all I have to say. This came out in the beginning of April, and I've been carrying it around with me. I've been reading it slowly because it is hard sometimes. And the day it came out, we all did a poetry reading, and I decided to read both of mine out loud because they're relatively short. And I cannot tell you both the relief and the anxiety it gave me, but it's there. So yeah, Reclaim the Light is out now. Link is down below. If you guys are interested, you can get it on Amazon. In addition to that, very exciting news, I submitted 2 other poems to a different small press, and we got rejected, which is fine. Honestly, it was a very lovely rejection. And if you guys are interested, I can read the brief little thing about it, which just made my heart swell. This is the second time. It's Full Mood Mag, which is online only, and it's free to submit, and they publish, like you don't get any royalties for getting the publish, just your name out there. And she was very cute. Now basically it was a no theme, so it really was a mood read, and she made that clear that, you know, we're mood reading, and it just didn't hit me with the mood. But she did say that one of my poems was so beautifully reflective and nostalgic. At first, it made me think about the places that come into our lives and become part of our memories in a bittersweet way. Then I thought about those moments when you're so hyper aware of history in a place that's existed before your time that you feel like you're the only one presently thinking about what once lived. I appreciate how this poem leaves space for so much reader interpretation. And that made me happy. Honestly, because that's one of my favorite poems I've written because of exactly how she felt. Like that is literally what I felt writing the poem. So the fact that she like got it just made me great. Now I'm sad that it's not going to be published, but I mean, if I got good feedback on that, that means someone's going to take Edgerton one day, and I'm going to have that published. So yeah, despite getting it rejected, that was really cool, and I'm happy that I continue to submit, even if it's slow and even if it's random, because that's pretty much what this was. It was a random submission. So yeah, outside of that, I have been working on Vampire. As you know, if you've been doing my vlogs, and I will encourage you to go watch the vlogs instead of me rehashing everything here, but I hit a bit of a mental health wall where I was in my head and not able to continue starting, and I would write a little bit of words, but like literally like 50 words, and then I would like get stuck and quit. So I kind of got over the hump at the end of April. I hit the wall again, and then, you know, we just fell off the targeted, like the, if you want to follow this as your recommended word count goal each week, like this is where you should be. And I fell off that by the end of April, and that's okay. I've decided that I'm not going to probably write the 75,000 words anyway, because I'm going to need to edit a lot, and in doing so, it's going to bulk it up because I have to rearrange like earlier scenes and move them later, and I'm pretty much like rewriting and like adding a lot to the beginning to change it. So I'm okay with that, but I couldn't get out of that slump. So Vampire is not yet done, but it is slowly making progress, and as of filming this, I'm in chapter 23 of 27, so we are really close. It's almost done. So it's gonna be done in May. It's gonna happen. So really that's the big news in my writing world. You know, most of the stuff you guys are gonna see is about me taking the Reads It course as well as doing my novel, but I have been slowly brain dumping 2 other novels that I've been considering. These have been on my mind in the past, but they are something that I'm like getting ideas for as I read more and as I'm finishing up Vampire and I'm thinking about my next project. I'm not sure, like there's a couple stories that I want to get to, both the two that I'm brain dumping. My Mermaid I kind of want to get back to, and I also have a satire book that I started writing, a fantasy satire, that I got like 10 or 15,000 words in, and I abandoned it for my Mermaid project. And I think like that would be a really fun palette cleanser to write, so I'm also considering like doing that once I'm done with all this stuff. So yeah, I'm not sure, but you know I've seen recirculating around AuthorTube, like people talking about their like all the novels they want to write again, like updating that video. So if anyone's interested in me having an update for that video, let me know, because I do think like I've had more ideas since then, and I've also fleshed some of them out more since then. So yeah, let me know. And last but not least, let's talk about some personal life tidbits. So I'll try to add a few clips in here too, but in the beginning of the month, I went to Boston, Massachusetts for the first time. It was one of my oldest friends' wedding. We knew each other since kindergarten, and while we are not nearly as close as we once were, it was really nice to see her and see her get married. Like, I've just known her since we were literally children, and I knew like how like anti-relationship she was for a long time because of like a bunch of different reasons. So seeing her like come full circle to like how we were like, I'm never getting married, to like her actually doing it was very bittersweet and lovely. Like, it was sad because like I miss like what we had as friends, you know, but like at the same time, like she's doing so much for her life and I'm so proud of her and so happy for her. So that was really nice. In addition to the wedding though, I went to my first Boston Celtics game. It was also my first NBA game, and it was so intense and so much fun. I would totally go again. I love watching basketball. It's so exciting in my opinion. Like, I feel like there's always something happening. It was really nice to watch the game, and it was like a very much like a shutout for a while. Like, they were like 20 points ahead for like the majority of the game. And then the last 30 seconds, the Kings like started scoring like crazy, caught up. They were then in the lead, 12 seconds left. The Celtics scored, and then the 7 seconds left, the Kings almost scored 3 different times, and it was the most insane feeling as everyone is on their feet and they're screaming and they're like, ah! It was such a cool moment. So I also cried 3 times, unrelated to basketball, because they were bringing these kids out, and these like kids did like this whole dance performance, and I cried for that. I cried because they honored this woman who like works with the homeless to help them get good footwear. Cried over that honor, and then I cried over something else too. Like, it was just like so emotional, but it was a great time. I also mentioned this at some point in, I think, a vlog, but I went on a Wild Woman wellness retreat, and I was a host, like a facilitator at it. And I helped with like all the other stuff, but I also facilitated 2 workshops, which one was over somatic healing, and the other was how to read tarot based on like reading the pictures and intuitively. And both went really well, and it felt really strange to be like an expert in something, and I can't wait to do it again. Like, I think that's like part of my calling, to help people like that, and that was really fun. Speaking of being an expert, I also was interviewed and with like other of my counseling associates, but like we were interviewed, and like I was put into a magazine like dedicated to mental health as an expert, and that was really surreal. Did not feel real. I know I have been doing counseling for 7 years and I'm good at it, but man, that was a trip. It's just weird to see my name and my credentials and all of that in the paper for anybody to read. So yeah. So that happened. Last but not least, I watched a couple things on the television and the movies, and honestly, I watched something in the beginning of April that I cannot remember, so apparently it wasn't good enough because I cannot remember what we watched, and neither can my husband, but I know we watched a movie. We also watched Dune Part 2, which was good, although it was very long, and I did not remember Part 1, so I think that's my bad, but I liked what I saw, and eventually I think I will read the book, but not yet. Then we had like a horror night that we were interested in. Like, we just wanted to do a horror night, which I was fine with because I haven't watched a lot of horror movies in a while. We watched Barbarian, which was pretty crazy. First half of Barbarian, if you watch Barbarian, like the first half was like so suspenseful as you were like trying to figure out what was happening. And the second half was freaking wild. And I'm like what? Not what I expected, but it was interesting. And Late Night with the Devil, I really liked that one actually. that's a possession movie, but I love the way it was shot. I love that it was on like a TV, late night TV set, and it was like that entire thing. I just really liked it. I appreciate the production value, and I appreciate the storytelling of it and how it was literally filmed. It was really cool. So I recommend that one if you haven't seen it. And then as far as TV goes, we finished Invincible on Amazon Prime. The half of the series like came out early, and then it ended, so we finished that. I wasn't even aware that the ending was the ending. So then after it like took me 2 weeks, I was like, oh my god, that show's over now. Like, that's how it ended. So it was a delayed reaction. And then we started watching the new season of Taskmaster, which is a great British comedy show. If you have not seen it, I go watch it on YouTube. You will be hooked. It's so fun, and me and my husband love watching that. So yeah, some good watching, I guess, as well this month. And I think I've talked for too long, so I feel like I've hit everything that I needed to touch upon for the month of April. So now it's up to you to let me know how your April was and what you guys read, what you wrote, what you did. I hope that you had a great month, and that's all for me. So until next time, I will see you then.